Take it away, Gabe.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to the Lean Six Sigma White Belt webinar. My name is Gabe CHAPA. I am the lead instructor for New Horizons for Lean Six Sigma. So thank you for coming out and hanging out for an hour just to kind of see what it's all about. Hopefully you'll get an opportunity to kind of maybe get an introduction into Lean Six Sigma, see how this might fit in your business and how you might use it. We will be having an opportunity to ask questions here later on, so I'm going to ask you at the moment to hold them to the very end. So this presentation should last about 1 hour in duration. I'm thinking the presentation itself will be about 45 or 50 minutes, and then I'll save some time at the very end to answer some questions. So let me start off with this. Let me make sure before I go any further that everybody has my contact information. You're certainly welcome to reach out to me directly if you'd like. I also will have an email address at the end where you can contact our office, where we have a group of experts who can answer your questions as well. But my contact information there, as you can see at the very top, I am a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. I have been one since April of 2013, so we're talking 5.5 years here. You'll also see at the top my email address there, gchapa@nhlearninggroup.com. Of course, if anybody here happens to be on LinkedIn, you're certainly welcome to find me and connect with me there as well. Just look for Gabe CHAPA or Gabriel CHAPA Jr., my full name. You will see that exact same picture that you see on the slide in the upper right corner on my LinkedIn account. So please feel free to connect. I like to put tips and tricks and shortcuts, not only from Lean Six Sigma, but from all the various courses that I teach out there as well. In addition to that, below that, you'll see that I do teach the white, yellow, green, and black belt certification courses. I teach all of our different Office courses, so everything from Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, Access, Link, Publisher, and OneNote, from Office 2003 up to the 2016 versions, which includes Office 365. Plus, you'll see some other general things that I teach as well. I am the lead for things like SharePoint, Windows, QuickBooks, SQL, some of our other business skills courses. And my experience at the bottom, I do have extensive experience in process improvement and project management. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer. I am also a modern connected classroom trainer. I am a Microsoft certified professional, a Microsoft Office Specialist Master. So, right, all those different feathers you put in your hat as you become a trainer and do this for several years. Below that, you'll see I have been here as an instructor with New Horizons since October 2010. So I'm just shy of 8 years being with this company. I've a couple of fun things about me at the bottom too. I've won several awards as a trainer. And then probably the most important thing to me on this slide, I am a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. I was in the Marines during Desert Storm and Desert Shield. So you're talking to a former platoon sergeant. So anyway, if anybody in this webinar has served, allow me to say thank you for your service. So let's talk about what we're going to be seeing over the next few minutes here. First, we're going to start off with what is Six Sigma. Just get a basic idea of what it is and a little bit of background, which is why we also have a history there after that. We're going to discuss the approach for Six Sigma. That function that you see there, that y equals fx, is known as the transfer function. It's something that every Six Sigma practitioner should be familiar with, so you'll get a chance to see that as well. We'll also discuss the methodology, right? Behind Six Sigma, right, there is a certain procedure or group of steps that you must follow, right, that you must do so methodically. So we're going to take a moment and discuss what the method is, just to kind of see how it works. We'll discuss the roles and responsibilities within the Six Sigma environment. We'll discuss Lean, because this is Lean Six Sigma, two separate things. So we'll talk about, although they work together, we'll discuss Lean a little bit, the history of it. We'll talk about the 7 deadly Muda, or the different kinds of waste you might see in a process. And then we'll open it up for questions at the very end. So as we go through this course, if you have questions, you are welcome to type them in the chat box. A good friend of mine, Jesse, is there ready to take all the questions and hold on to them for me. And at the end of this webinar, he's going to tell me what those questions are. We'll answer as many as we can during the time that we have. Of course, if you have questions outside of this, or if we don't get a chance to get to your question, you're certainly welcome to email info, right? You'll see later on, info@nhlearninggroup.com, or you can email me too. I will make sure that my marketing team also has a copy of that. And then we'll talk about the next steps. And then finally, the white belt test at the very end. So you'll get an opportunity to go out, take a little simple 10-question quiz, and it will provide you with a little a certificate just to kind of let you know, hey, you have at least a white belt knowledge, a level of understanding. So let's jump into this. Let's talk a bit about what Six Sigma is. So the first thing, what exactly is it? Well, when I hear people ask about what is Six Sigma, they're not quite sure what it means, right? They're not sure what Six Sigma or Lean Six Sigma is. So in a Sigma as far as what is sigma, it refers to standard deviation in statistics. So really what you're talking about is you're trying to figure out how much variation you have in a process. See, everything around you is a process. When you get up in the morning to get ready for work, that's a process. Make a pot of coffee, that's a process. Right? A process is nothing more than a sequence of steps that have a defined beginning and a defined end that lead to an outcome of some kind, either a product or a service, right? And when you're talking about deviation, the idea should be that every time you run that process, if you use the same materials and follow the same procedures and do everything the same way each and every time, you should, with a reasonable amount of expectation, end up with some kind of an output. Think about it along the lines of, I don't know if you bake or perhaps cook, if you're following a recipe, right? The idea behind a cookbook is supposed to be that if you look at the recipe, have the same ingredients, same measurements, follow the procedures in there, the exact steps from beginning to end, you should, with a reasonable amount of expectation, end up with the final output, which could be whatever dish you're making or whatever you're baking, right? And typically in a cookbook, you'd see pictures that kind of show you what's supposed to look like along the way. Well, variation is not necessarily a good thing in a process, right? In fact, it's the enemy of any quality process. So the goal here is you want to minimize, understand, just to kind of manage that a little bit, right? Companies like McDonald's, they didn't become famous because they have the greatest food in the world. It's not that. McDonald's made their name by minimizing variation. So whether you go to McDonald's in Southern California, in Texas, in New York, anywhere around the US, and you go order a Big Mac is a Big Mac is a Big Mac. The process is what they've mastered. So what exactly is Six Sigma? It's the measurement, the goal that we're trying to get to, right? It's the level of precision that we're trying to accommodate. The goal here is for the average of our process, or in statistics, the mean, to operate about 6 sigma or 6 standard deviations away from the customer's high and low specifications. That is what we're trying to accomplish. So, because if you have a process that is that refined and has that much wiggle room between your process average and what the nearest specification is, if your process ever starts to perform the way it's not expected to, which can happen, we still stay within what the customer tells us is allowable. So if you look at the bottom of the slide right here, you'll see the average of your process right in the middle. You'll see your 6 deviations above and below the mean, right? The average of your process. And let's say, for example, this is drilling a hole, and your customer is telling you can drill a hole up to 34.25 millimeters, and that's as big as it can get, and as small as it can get is 33.75. Well, if my process average is right in the middle at 34, and I'm staying within that level of precision, 6 sigma, even if I drill a hole a little bit bigger than 34 or a little bit smaller than 34, I'm still within what the customer is telling me is required, because this 34.25, anything above that, maybe the hole's too big for me to use for my screws or my bolts. If I have a 33.75 and below that, it's too small and I can't work with it. So my goal is, can I stay within the center? Sigma level. How many sigma or standard deviations are there between the average of your process and the nearest customer specification? See, what happens a lot of times in the real world is your process mean may not necessarily be centered between what the customer tells you is allowable. And they also may not give you that big of a range. On the previous slide, we had 3375 to 3425. What if you had a smaller number, like 33.9 to 34.1? Smaller range to work with, which means my process needs to be that much more refined. However, not every process is capable of performing at that level, right? Because there may be something introduced to your process that causes it not to be at that level of efficiency, right? It could be the people who are using the process. Maybe it's a manual item, a manual process, and mistakes can be made. It could be a measurement mistake. It could be equipment changes, calibration changes. There could be a lot of different reasons. And those are a lot of the things that we cover in our classes. This table that you see here gives you an idea of the 6 different sigma levels and how it applies to the defect rate that you have in your process. So as you see here, if you've got a 6 sigma level process, your defect rate is 0.00034%, which is really, really small. So for that reason, when we're looking at the defect rate, we typically multiply that out times 1,000,000 and look at this and say, okay, for every 1,000,000 opportunities that are out there, what are we looking at now? So if you take that and you multiply that number by 1,000,000, you will have the resolution necessary to evaluate the number of defects all the way up to the Six Sigma level. That's the reason why you have DPMO, or defect management opportunities. This means if I have a Six Sigma level process, my defects that are allowable to maintain that level of precision, I can only have up to 3.4. So let's say I have a call center, and in that call center, every single call that comes in must be answered within 3 rings or less to maintain Six Sigma. Well, once I get up to the 4th call that comes in that is 4 rings and beyond, I'm no longer Six Sigma capable. I'm now the level below that, because it goes from 3.4 all the way up to 232 defects. This is the bucket that you would see there. A 4 Sigma level would be above 232 and below 6209. So it's ranges that you're seeing. A process operating at a 1 Sigma level has a defect rate of 70%, right? You saw it here in the previous slide. So if I have a 1 Sigma level, the defect rate is 69.76%, which means that almost 700,000 out of 1 million opportunities for something to go wrong did. So that really means only 30% of the time is the process going to generate a defect-free product. So is that something that's acceptable? Can you allow that every 10 times you go to make something that only 3 out of 10 it comes out the way you expected it to be? Some customers will tell you no. You might even see that if I get to something like this, a 3 Sigma level, which is a defect rate of 7%, that means that 93% of the time the customer is getting what they want. Is that acceptable? And you'll see on the slide some examples here of what could happen if a process operates at that 3 Sigma level, right? You might have 54,000 banks lost each night by a single, or checks rather, lost each night by a single bank. So that could be a major problem, especially if it's your check. At a 1% defect rate, now we're talking about this. 99% of the time, your process is producing what it's supposed to. That means only 1% of the time it's not doing that. But even at a 1% defect rate, some processes may be unacceptable. I mean, look at what you see there on the slide. Unsafe drinking water, 15 minutes a day. 5,000 incorrect surgical operations per week. So I don't know about you, but I don't want to be one of those 5,000. No electricity for about 7 hours a month. I personally have 3 kids. They love to be online all the time. Can you imagine in the middle of the day if you had 7 hours of no internet, what might happen? I kind of don't want to think about that. So if you have a 6 Sigma level process, here's the deal. Sigma level is the measure, and 6 is the goal that we're trying to attain. Now, the term Six Sigma has been around for a bit. It was actually created by a guy by the name of Bill Smith, who used to work at Motorola in the 80s. It was a quality management methodology, right? So, and Bill is known as the father of Six Sigma. And when he rolled this out and he went to the CEO of Motorola, Bob Galvin, he said, hey, you know, rather than make products the way they are right now, because back then Motorola was really kind of inferior quality products. He said, you know, what we could do is if we minimize the amount of variation every time we make a new product, you know, a phone or a beeper or whatever the product happened to be, if we can minimize the variation every time we create these products, we're going to get more consistent. And if we can be more consistent, then we can improve our quality. And Bob bought into this and said, hey, that's a great idea. So let's try it out. So they tested it out, found out it worked pretty well. So then Bob said, you know what, we need to teach everybody in the company. And that's where Motorola University began, with teaching everyone within the Motorola company how to utilize this new process management discipline. Well, you know, Motorola's products started getting better, and other companies started taking notice, like GE. Jack Welch, the leader of GE at the time, noticed that, hey, you know, Motorola's doing better over there. What are they doing differently now than they were doing before? So he went out and found out that, oh, they're using this thing called Six Sigma. I want to do that here. So that's what he did. He took it and implemented it at GE, and then their processes got better too. Now, when you start going through classes like this, Lean Six Sigma courses like the one that we offer, the ones that we do offer, A lot of programs are going to offer you just the Six Sigma aspect. You don't always get the combination of Six Sigma together with lean. See, lean or lean manufacturing, been around for a bit since the 60s. Maybe you've heard before the Toyota Production System or TPS. So lean, right? The goal of lean is to eliminate waste and increase efficiency, where Six Sigma is all about minimizing variation in your process. So the goal is here with Lean Six Sigma is that they work together hand in hand in order to do exactly that, to make sure the customer is getting what they want, how they want it, but at the same time, as efficiently as possible from the company. Lean Six Sigma, or Six Sigma itself, been around for a long time. However, when something is new, like it was back in the 80s or so, people kind of looked at it like, well, it's kind of a newfangled fad thing. We're not really sure if it's going to work. Right? That's the way it is. People look at something new and think it's a fad until it's proven itself and it sticks around for a while. And that's what happened with Lean and Six Sigma, right? They've both been around for a bit, but at the very beginning, people thought, oh, you know, it's kind of a fad thing. We'll see what happens with here. We're not going to try it out, but maybe down the road. Okay. Hey, if you ever want to see some really neat Six Sigma implementation, go out real quick. And I don't know if you've seen the movie from the 80s called Gung Ho with Michael Keaton. If you ever watch that movie, you'll see some examples of Six Sigma and where the auto workers that are there, U.S. auto workers, don't really understand what the heck's going on. But if you learn more about Lean Six Sigma and the methods, the different tools you can use, you'll see some of that there. Just a little sidebar. The transfer function. Y is a function of x. Really what it is, it's a mathematical expression of the relationship between the inputs and outputs of a system. So if you're familiar with using functions in Excel, like sum and average and things like that, this is very much like that. So y equals a function of x, or y is a function of x, is the transfer function that every practitioner should use. Typically, you will see this example really, really well in a fishbone diagram. So the y refers to this. The y refers to your primary measurement or your primary metric. What is the one thing that you're trying to change or improve? Usually it's an output of a process. Function of x, the x's are all the factors or the inputs in your process that can affect the y. So the goal here is pretty simple, to figure out which of the x's or inputs have the most impact on the output so that when you change them, they change the output of your process in the fashion that you desire. In simplest terms, your process of performance is dependent on certain x's. So here's an example. Let's say you've got a pizza company. You're in charge of a pizza delivery company, and your goal is to meet the customer expectation of delivering pizza on time. So the metric that we're going to capture to see if we're successfully doing this is we're going to look at the percentage of on-time deliveries. How often do we do this correctly? That would be your y. The x's would be the inputs. What factors could have a direct influence on my ability to deliver on time? So you start listing them all out. Hey, so it could be traffic. It could be the number of deliveries every driver takes out when they leave the store. It could be the accuracy of the directions given to the driver on where to go take the pizza. It also could be the reliability of the delivery vehicle. And as you can see there, you could keep adding X after X after X. So at the moment, we're brainstorming, trying to figure out, well, what's really going to have an impact on on-time deliveries? And you could have a lot more than that. So then our next goal would be this. Take all those different X's. Look at each independent X. For example, number of deliveries per driver dispatch. And we can use data, we'd have to keep data on this and capture it and then evaluate to say, hey, is this true? Does the number of deliveries per driver dispatch seem to have an impact on the output? Does the traffic? Does the accuracy? And the goal here is to get rid or eliminate the ones that have no discernible impact on the output. So you whittle down until you get the X's that do have influence, because then you have somewhere to go work with or something to go work with. So effectively, at this point, we're getting into root cause analysis, figuring out what really is the true reason that's causing those pizzas to not be delivered on time, rather than just looking at a list and go, oh yeah, I think it's just traffic. Traffic's bad in the afternoon. Is that always the case? Is that the one thing alone that's causing my deliveries to be not on time? So rather than going with the what you think is going on, you use data-driven analysis to determine whether something is or something is having a direct influence on my pizza delivery times. And that's what the transfer function allows you to do. As I stated earlier, Six Sigma is the goal, not the method. Right? In order to get to Six Sigma to achieve that level of precision, you may have to minimize process variation so that your process has enough room to fluctuate between whatever the customer tells you is acceptable. Also, as I said earlier, sometimes your process isn't already centered between the upper and lower specification limits from the customer. So you may have to adjust your process. Just keep in mind, not every customer you're going to want to shift your process for, right? Because it depends on how much work you have to go through to shift your process. It may not be appropriate depending on what it is. Now, if you can accomplish those two things, along with keep your process stable, which means historically it's supposed to be where it's supposed to be, and in control, that means as you move forward, it's where it's supposed to be as far as your within your specifications, then you have the ability to achieve Six Sigma. And the way you achieve Six Sigma is you utilize the methodology that has an acronym known as DMAIC. DMAIC is a systematic and rigorous methodology that can be applied to any process in order to achieve Six Sigma. And the reason I see any up there underlined on the slide is pretty simple. Most people, when they think about Six Sigma or Lean Six Sigma, think it is a production-only thing. It only works when you have physical things in front of you that you can see, like in a warehouse. That's not true. Everything around you is a process. Think about this for a moment. When you're at your job and you're either the person submitting a request for time off, or maybe you're the manager, director, right, the person receiving that request, isn't there a set of steps that have to be followed, a procedure that must be followed if somebody wants to take some time off? Right? Don't they have to first submit the request, and then once the request is received, then you have to see, okay, does this person have enough time in the books to make this kind of request? What kind of request are they making? When are they doing it? Right? A lot of different things that go into it, but at the end of the day, there's usually one of two outcomes in this case. Either the person has been approved for that request and can take it, or they have not been approved. But see, the deal here is they have to start with submitting the request, and it ends with request either approved or denied. Along the way, there are certain steps that get followed. That's a process. When you make coffee in the morning, let's assume that you guys either make coffee or you make tea. Let me ask you this question. If you're going to go make coffee or tea in the morning, you decide, you know what, I really want a cup right now. And you go into the kitchen. And what is the first thing that you do? What's the first thing that you do when you get in the kitchen and you see your coffee pot or you're getting ready to do the tea? So right now, you know, I can't see what your answers are, but in my class, I ask questions like this, and you'll be amazed if I said, okay, guys, we're all going into the kitchen together and we're going to make a cup of tea. What's the first thing that you do now that you're in the kitchen? I get a variety of responses. Got to grab my cup. Got to make sure I get up some water into a pot or a carafe so I can boil it. I need to make sure I've got my ingredients. I've got to have my, you know, whatever it is. But not very often do we have the same starting point. So that's what I talk about in classes. What is a process? Where does it start? Where does it end? What are the steps? But anything's a process, not just things that you see in production. Submitting a time off request, submitting a status report, an expense report, making a pot of coffee, cutting the grass, making your bed, making a sandwich. Every single thing has a process that you follow that lead to the end result. The goal here is to be consistent so that everybody does the same thing. Anyway, the 5 phases: define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. In our courses, you're exposed to many examples, concepts, and tools that lead you through DMAIC, so that at the end of it, you understand how you can impact a process, how you can improve the performance of any process by following these steps. As I said, DMAIC, define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. Each individual phase has its own specific purpose and its own tools and techniques that you use to achieve the objectives. So let's take just a moment and kind of dive into that so you can get a feel for what this methodology is. Hope you guys are doing okay, by the way, this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you happen to be. So the define phase. The goal of the define phase is to establish that you have a problem, right? There's a problem going on right now. This is arguably the most difficult thing to grasp at the very beginning, right? Say that you have an issue that's going on. Now, in addition to saying, here's a specific problem that we're looking at the beginning, every project must start with a current state challenge, basically identifying what is the problem today. And notice it says that whatever problem you have, it must be articulated in a quantifiable manner. Because it's not enough just to know you have a problem. You got to make the business care about why there's a problem. So if you think back to the pizza delivery thing we saw a few slides ago, we were talking about we want to see what impacts our ability to deliver to customers on time. Okay, we're looking at a percentage. So if we want to know where we are right now, we can say, we can gather data. We can capture data to gather and say, okay, how often are we not on time or on time? And over the last week or two, looking at all deliveries, we can say we have been 75% of the time successful with getting customers their pizza on time. That means that 25% of the time we're not doing so. So we have to do that. We have to look at where we are right now and think about the reason why. When you go to lose weight, right, for those of you that have tried to lose weight before, why do you capture your measurement at the very beginning before you start losing your weight? So you know where you are. So that way when you start doing the things you're supposed to do, the exercising, the sleeping better, the drinking more water, watching your diet and so on, that every time you go back to measure yourself again, you can know whether or not you're doing the right things to push you in the right direction. And your goal is to lower that weight. Just like in our case here, we know a starting point. So that way when we do tweak the process, we can see if it's leading us to a higher percentage of getting the pizzas out on time. So once you know what your goal is and the problem, the rest of the define phase is all about value. Why is this important to the company? What's the value of doing so? And there we can look at it a couple of different ways. You can talk about who's on the team, the scope, the project planning, the timeline, the stakeholders, all these different aspects of Six Sigma, the voice of the customer, the voice of the business. The measure phase. The measure phase is all about establishing your baseline. And not only establishing your baseline, but establishing how you're gathering that data. I was talking about measuring, maybe trying to lose weight a while ago. And I said, you know, if you're trying to lose weight, you measure yourself the first time. Well, the goal here is to, when you first measure yourself, to establish the conditions, the process you use to weigh yourself. Like if I'm here at my house and I go into the bathroom, chances are I'm going to weigh myself using a bathroom scale. And I'm going to take that scale, I'm going to put it on the tile, and I'm going to put it in the same spot every time. If I have to calibrate it, I will back down to 0. I want to make sure I'm weighing myself around the same time every day, wearing around the same amount of clothing. So when I step on it, I get as much of an accurate representation of my current body weight. And then when I go back and weigh myself again tomorrow, I want to repeat the exact same process each and every time. So that way, every time I measure myself, if I do see differences in my body weight on the scale, it can be because of changes in how much I actually weigh, not changes on the scale because of something I changed in the way that I'm gathering the information. Wearing different amounts of clothes, different time of day, before a meal, after a meal, right? That's why you do that. So that, in our case, we're talking about a measurement systems analysis. That's what we cover in the measure phase. Establish where your baseline is, and also the method that you're using to gather the data, as well as how you're gathering your data, over what time period, and so on. That's what you see in your measure phase. We're going to look at the cost of poor quality as well, right? When you're talking about the cost of poor quality, the way it used to work in the past is when I was a kid, and by the way, I'm 51. When I was a kid growing up in Southeast Texas, I grew up in a town called Victoria. only about 20,000 people there. So when my mom and I would go to the store when I was a young kid in the early 70s, she would have to go, and if a company had a product on the shelf and she wanted it, there wasn't much option for her. She bought it the way it was. So if a company wanted to make more money, they could simply raise the cost of their product, and my mom would either have to pay it if she really wanted it, or she would just not buy it. Today, you can't get away with that, right? Today, you've got the internet. People carry around phones. People have phones with Google open so they can search for things, or they might have the Amazon app open so they can see how much is this in the store and how much is it online. And if it's cheaper online and I can afford to wait for the shipping, I want to buy it online. So really, you can't afford as a company to raise prices on products because people are going to look elsewhere. And you probably do this too. So what you have to do is not raise the cost of the items, but rather make it better the first time. So you're getting rid of all the things that could cause the quality of your process to not be where it's supposed to be at. That is how better quality products are made for a lower cost. If you think back to the 80s, the 70s and the 80s, for the longest time, Japanese cars were considered inferior to American made until they started using Lean and Six Sigma. They started improving the quality of their products. You might remember for a while in the 70s and 80s, all of a sudden, especially the early 80s, how Japanese cars overtook American made as far as quality, right? Because if you're going to spend your money on a car, don't you want to get the most out of your money? And that's what was going on. It took US automakers quite a while to finally catch on to what was going on and then finally turn it around to where now they're competitive again. Why? All due to poor quality. The analyze phase, the third of the 5 phases, is all about establishing verified drivers. So, in the measure phase, we establish our baseline, and we're talking about the pizza delivery. This is where you sit down and you look at each individual X or input, and you use data, statistics, high order analytics to try to figure out, hey, does this, for my pizza delivery time, does the number of orders going out per driver really have an impact? And if so, how much? Because if it does have a big enough impact, great, we want to take this and we want to make the modifications in the next phase. And if it doesn't, we want to get rid of it. So that's what the analyze phase is all about. Coming up with data-driven hypothesis, right? You make a hypothesis about something, whether it is or whether it isn't. Use data to prove that hypothesis so you can figure out, okay, I can move this forward to improve it. Or don't waste my time. This is where root cause analysis really kicks in. Again, why is the function of X is used? The improve phase is just like it sounds. Tweak the process. Change the X's so that they can change the Y and get it where you want it to be. It's kind of like, if you think about it for a second, when you're cooking a dish on the stove and you make a dish and say, ooh, this is pretty good, but then you change an ingredient. Ooh, let's add a little bit more salt here. Did adding a bit more salt to your dish change the flavor in the way that you wanted it to? Or sugar, or whatever it is. The improve phase is all about going in and tweaking that recipe so that you get the desired result. Increasing the process, decreasing the process, whatever it is, it's getting it to where you want it to be. And typically when you're looking at a process improvement like this and you get to the point where you're actually changing the process, you're going to do this in a small group, in a test group. For those that work with software at all, it's kind of like beta testing, where you test it out with a small group of people to say, hey, is this doing what I think it's supposed to do? And if it's not, we can make the adjustments here in the small group. We can do it rapidly. We can make sure things are good before I roll the solution out to everybody. That's part of what this particular phase is all about, making sure everything is the way it's supposed to be. And then finally, the control phase. The control phase is often overlooked. It's where you now have this new and improved process. The process is working the way you want it to work. These are the items that keep those new processes working the way they're supposed to. Typically, documentation, or it could be control checks along the way. You might be using Poka-yoke. You might be using statistical process control, right? Different kinds of tools designed specifically to make sure that once you've made this process new and improved in the way you want it to work, that it stays that way. So basically instructions on doing so. And the reason I say it's kind of overlooked is because I've been involved before with several projects. I've been involved with Six Sigma, by the way, for about going on close to 7 years now. And every project that I've been involved with where I go in and they say, you know, we've done a process improvement on this before. Great. Let me see your control plan. Crickets is what I hear. So why? Because somebody went through the process of improving a process itself to make it what it's supposed to be, but they didn't document it. They didn't follow the new procedure, right? Because think about this for a moment, guys. The objective behind process improvement is to do exactly that. Improve the process. So when you improve a process, you change it. So what was there before no longer applies. It's now a brand new process with new steps that must be followed, or else you fall back into the old ways of doing things. In my classes, I talk about, you know, there's companies out there that do a great job with helping people lose weight. Companies like Weight Watchers and Jenny Craig, right? They're really, really good at doing what they do. They wouldn't be in business if they weren't. What they do differently to help you lose weight than what you do on your own is typically there's somebody there to provide structure. There's a coach of some kind. So if I'm looking at that and thinking about it this way, the methodology would be in the define phase, I identify I need to lose weight. So I go to one of those companies and tell them, I need to lose weight. I have a wedding coming up this summer, or I've got to go to something going where I need a tux, a class reunion, whatever it is. And in the measure phase, okay, let's take a look at where you are today. Let's figure out where you're at, and let's kind of figure out what's going on with you. Then let's figure out what kind of led you to that. Let's put a plan in place to correct those things, so that way you can start losing the weight you want to lose. So we'll go do all that. We'll keep on working on it. We'll stay in your ear, tell you don't eat that, don't drink that, make sure you exercise, get lots of sleep. And then in the improve phase, you're making the gains and you finally get to where you want to be, right? Woohoo, I crossed the finish line. I've lost my 20 pounds or whatever it is I want to do. Well, do you know what happens to people and what they do, folks, whenever they accomplish a goal like that? I've lost my 20 pounds. People tend to celebrate. They tend to celebrate. And when they celebrate, guess what they do? Oh, I'll take a beer. Let me have a glass of that wine. Oh, let's eat some cake or pizza. You know, a slice isn't going to hurt anything. And then they go back into their old lifestyle and do the things that they did before. Well, guess what? If you do the old things you did before, you're going to go back to the weight you had before. However, and that's where people fail, because they stop the program and they stop doing all the things that they did to get them to their desired weight. That's what the control phase is all about. Hey, you went through yourself all this stuff. You killed yourself going through all these different things to get to where you want to be. So why not you maintain that? Keep doing that, right? Level that off so you can stay here. Because if you go back to what you did before, guess what? You're going to go back to the weight you did before, and then you're going to be calling again. Hey, I need to lose weight again. That's what the difference is. All right, a few more slides here. We're not too far away from being done, so hang in there a little bit longer. By the way, thank you for coming out today and taking some time out of your schedule to hang out with me and listen to me talk a bit about some of this. I'm hoping you guys are at least getting some basic information and getting some questions answered. And if not, like I said, at the end, you'll be afforded the opportunity to ask some questions. And if not, if you're not doing that yet, you can always chat in the chat box, and my coworker, my friend Jesse here, is collecting those for me. So in addition to the belts, right? White belt, yellow belt, green belt, black belt, master black belt. There's another side of the house. There's a second side of the house that revolves around this. So starting off with the belts, this is what they are. And by the way, in case you're wondering why they call them belts, remember that guy a while ago, Bill Smith, the father of Six Sigma? Real big fan of martial arts. So if you think about it a moment, why do they use belts in martial arts? Why do you see, like in karate, jiu-jitsu, taekwondo, right, different martial arts, why do they use black belts and yellow belts and green and yellow and orange, all these different colors? See, the goal behind the belt is to let somebody know visually right away that person's level of proficiency, expertise, knowledge. That's what this is. So instead of saying you're a beginner, intermediate, advanced, and so on, they use the different belts in here to signify your level of expertise. The top of that level or list is known as the master black belt. The most experienced, educated, and capable Six Sigma expert. This is what I currently am working on right now. A typical master black belt You've managed dozens of black belt level projects. You've led lots of different projects. You've mentored and certified black and green belt candidates. Basically, what you do is you work with companies, you work with operations directors, executives, just to try to figure out where Six Sigma can help with your project, with your company, right? Different processes and procedures and so on. The black belt, where I am right now. This is considered the most active and valuable experienced Six Sigma professional because you lead lots of projects. And that's the difference right there. As a master black belt, you take the high level approach, right? You look at the company and try to figure out where Six Sigma can be implemented. As the black belt, you do the implementing. You lead the projects, you lead the teams. So that way we can implement Six Sigma here. So as you can see there at the bottom, a black belt is usually well-rounded in a lot of different areas. Project management, statistical analysis, financial analysis. Does that mean you're an expert in finance? No. Usually when I'm doing projects, I'll talk to the people that are experts in those areas. Rely on their knowledge to help you. Meeting facilitation can be a scary thing for a black belt. If you're not used to standing in front of a group of people and leading a meeting and telling people where they need to go and what to do and put people in the right position to succeed, it can be a scary thing. Not everybody likes to stand in front of people and talk. I personally don't, but it's part of my job and it's what I've learned to do. But that doesn't mean that I don't have apprehension every time I stand in front of a group, because I think that's kind of a natural thing. Anyway, a lot of different things you see as a black belt. A green belt, less intense version of the black belt. You do a lot of things that the black belt does, except you don't do as much in the higher end statistics. And there's something else to think about too. As a green belt, effectively, you're working only on one project at a time. And usually it's a project that is in your area of influence. Whereas a black belt, you might work on multiple projects at the same time, across different teams within a company or even within different companies. The yellow belt, basic understanding of what a Six Sigma project is, right? You help out the other belts do what they're supposed to do, right? The subject matter experts have this level of understanding. Supervisors, managers, directors, anytime I go in to work with a company on a project, I want to make sure that the people that are in the know what they've got to know, right? So that they understand as we're doing something, why we're doing it and so on. The white belt, which is not listed on the slide deck, is kind of what you guys are doing today. Just a quick 30, 45 minutes, 1 hour overview of Six Sigma to understand the basics of what it is, but you don't really get into working with any of the tools or any other things like that. It's just a super high level picture of what this is. The flip side of this, the non-belt side, are the champions and sponsors. The individuals or organizations that are chartering, funding, and driving Six Sigma projects that the black belts and green belts do. It really, really helps if they have a basic understanding of DMAIC so that they can provide the proper support and direction. You've also got stakeholders. Stakeholders, the recipients or beneficiaries of the success of a project. They're the ones that have a vested interest in it, but they may not necessarily use it. However, within a company, they may be able to provide resources, or they can also hinder your progress. So that's why it's important to know who the champions are, right? So that way, if you come across things like this, the champions or the owners can help you remove some of those barriers to success, which is what they're designed to do. Subject matter experts, I can tell you right now that anytime I do any kind of a project, these are the people I rely upon the most. They are the ones that know the processes in and out. And I proactively look to them, because they know what we can do, what we can't do. When we start looking at solutions, what's allowable, what's not, what might work, what might not. So it's really, really critical that their voices be heard the most over everybody else. In addition to that, not every SME is going to talk and speak up. So sometimes you've got to know how to coax it out a little bit, right? Because sometimes the thing that's not said can be equally as important, if not more important, than what gets said in a process improvement project. These are the different belts that you see, as well as the critical and complementary roles. As far as lean thinking goes back a long way. Henry Ford kind of established it early on with the first mass production system by combining standard parts, conveyors, and workflow. Later on, Kichiro Toyota and Taiichi Ono over at Toyota implemented new concepts. They came up with things like value stream, takt time, Kanban, all based upon what Ford did, and that became known as a Toyota production system. Starting in the 90s, it became more extensively recognized as a solution that works. And lean manufacturing, that term, was introduced by a guy named James Womack, or Jim Womack, who works at the Lean Institute, or founded it. These two things together, Lean and Six Sigma, been around for at least 30 or 40 years. They work hand in hand, right, in order to provide minimizing variance as well as more efficient processes. Okay, last few slides in here, because we've got about maybe 5 or 6 more minutes before I wrap the slides up, and then I want to see if I can answer some questions. The 7 deadly Muda. Muda is Japanese for waste. Now, when you're looking at a process, you want to see if there's any kind of waste involved with it. And there are these different 7 types: defects, overproduction, overprocessing, inventory, motion, transportation, and waiting. Defects in a process are pretty obvious. Anytime you have to rework something, redo it, repair something, replace, pretty much in processes, if you use the letters RE, right, refund, stuff like that, there's not really a good thing. So when we're looking at the process itself, I want to find out, are there any defects that are occurring during production? So I can find a way to prevent it from happening, if at all possible. Overproduction, making more materials or products than the customer or the next function requires. So think about like an assembly line. If you have one section of an assembly line that makes too much, the next step can't process it, can't work fast enough to keep up. And overproduction does lead to some of the other wastes, like inventory, right? If you make more product that can be shipped out at any given time, you've got inventory, and inventory effectively could be money on a shelf. It also impacts transportation and waiting. Overprocessing, when you have more work done than is required by the next process step, a lot of times overprocessing is known as overkill. Like, let's say you want to do some simple mathematical calculations, and rather than using a calculator, you go buy a whole new computer, you install Office, you have Excel, and then you do your calculations there, when a simple calculator would have done, right? Making it more complex or expensive than required. Love the guy on fire up here, by the way. I always get a kick out of that. Inventory. Doesn't seem like it would be a waste, but it is. Because think about that. If you have a company that produces inventory that's being stored on shelves like you see in that picture, think about what went into making that happen. All the resources, the people being used, the equipment, the shelves, the building, the land, the electricity, security, right? Temperature control, all those things. That's money being used on something that is not getting that product into the customer's hand. Motion. Motion is another form of waste. It is the unnecessary movement of people, right? That's all it really is. Bending, stretching, walking back and forth, repetitive processes over and over again. Motion is a most common waste. Usually it's caused by layout, inefficient layout of a process or a location. Transportation is the unnecessary movement of product, moving things back and forth. Having a copier in one room, but having all the paper, printer, toner, all that stuff in a separate room where you're unnecessarily moving back and forth. Again, this can cause layout issues. So usually when I talk about motion and transportation, what I tell people is think about going to eat at Chipotle versus Subway. If you go to Subway, right, you've got the sandwich expert that meets you at the front, and they literally walk you down the line, putting your sandwich together from step to step to step to step. So that person's moving right along with the food. If you go to Chipotle, everything's cafeteria style. So everybody's standing in a line behind the counter, and your food is what's moving down the line. Right? That's the big difference between transportation and motion. And to kind of date myself, when I talk to my classes about this, I tell them, hey, do you remember that song, The Locomotion? Well, if you think about the locomotion, right, the different versions of it, they're all kind of upbeat, kind of peppy. They make you want to move and dance. So if you want to keep this clear in your head, think about motion as the locomotion, people moving, versus transportation, which is not. Waiting, one of the most common wastes that you see out there, the most obvious one, you're waiting for something to get done before you can do your part of the process. Waiting typically is caused by bottlenecks, poorly designed workflows, inefficiencies in your process, right? So one thing I do want to tell you is while you do go through this and you try to improve processes, right, there's a difference between improving a process and automating a process. Improving a process, you're trying to actually make the process better. Automating a process, you're automating what's already there. And you can't, just because you make a bad process automated, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a good process. All right, so Lean and Six Sigma together. The Lean side focuses on eliminating waste, process flow, pull systems, and an easy visual approach. Six Sigma is all about eliminating defects, right? Minimizing variation. These two things together are designed to provide quality and value for the customer, as well as efficiency for the business. As I said, try to get through this a little bit earlier so that I can have some time for questions at the end. So at this point, if you've asked some questions, I'm going to ask Jesse to either, I guess, turn on your mic and tell me what the questions are, or if you want to type them on the side chat box where I can see it over here, and I can see if I can answer a question or two for you guys.
Sure, I'll just go ahead and speak them to you right here. I answered a lot of the audio questions. One of the topic questions is, where does Lean Six Sigma fall within the Agile world? Can they be combined, or are they completely different methodologies?
Agile and Six Sigma are a little different, right, when you start getting into what they're for. So when you're just talking about Lean Six Sigma, remember, Lean Six Sigma uses DMAIC, right? When you're getting into Agile, if memory serves me correctly, when you're looking at Agile development, you're talking about in the software world, right, if I'm not mistaken? So you can use some of the aspects, right, because Agile is more about taking a look at software development and trying to figure out what kind of requirements and solutions you can come up with, which is very much like this. So you are going to do some root cause analysis. I'd have to do, I would think, a little more research within Agile. I know just the general aspects of it, so I'm not 100% sure that it would be a complete crossover, but I do know I have had some students that are Agile professionals that have taken the Lean Six Sigma class. So I'm thinking if they've taken the class, there must be a reason. Right, there must be some overlap, or maybe they're trying to see if there's something they can implement from there. Whoever asked the question, if you would provide either to here, info@nhlearninggroup.com, or email me directly at gchapa, or actually just do it there at info. You can always email and let me know your name and email address. I'll do some more research and see if I can give you a more definitive answer on what that could do.
Thank you, Gabe. We were also asking about links for higher level classes. In the follow-up emails, we will have the recording, and I believe, are we going to be able to send out the PowerPoint, Gabe?
Yes,
Okay.
actually, that's the one I sent to you. So if you would like to, send that to everybody else, they can have a copy of this, because it will have my email address in there. It'll have info down here at the bottom. It'll also have the next slide, which provides the link for the white belt exam in case anybody wants to take it. But in addition to the PowerPoint, as Jesse said, you will be provided at least some information about, okay, if I want to take Six Sigma, what do I do?
Yeah, so the follow-up email, which will be sent out by the end of the week, will have a link to the recording. It'll also have a link to the PowerPoint slides, and it will have links for the next upcoming courses in the path for Six Sigma training. Okay. One question is, what is Muda again, if you could just reiterate that?
Sure. Muda is the Japanese term for waste. And in the Six Sigma world, we break down waste by looking at this. We look at the 7 most commonly recognized forms of waste in processes: defects, overproduction, overprocessing, inventory, motion, transportation, and waiting. What you're going to find, ladies and gentlemen, is that when you're looking at the Lean Six Sigma world, there are a lot of Japanese terms that are used, because early on, when Lean and Six Sigma were created, a lot of that was done here in the US, but it was never really utilized. So when we had effectively Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right, and pretty much a lot of the infrastructure of Japan was taken out, when it was rebuilt, they had the ability to rebuild it in any fashion that they wanted. So Kiichiro Toyota and Taiichi Ono, those guys that worked at Toyota, they took the basic idea of Lean, right, of the assembly line that Henry Ford did, and they tweaked it, they modified it into their new processes. And because they did this in Japan, Japanese terms were assigned to these different concepts and tools and ideas. So when we look at them here in the US, they weren't translated into English words, they kept the Japanese words, which is why you see Muda and not just waste.
Wesley says thank you.
You're welcome.
And somebody else added on to the previous question about Agile, somebody different commenting, Agile can be used to focus on measure, analyze, improve within the methodology. The cycles work well there.
Perfect. Thank you.
That was Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. Any other questions at the moment before I bring up the last slide here?
Let's see. Is the waste of skills not considered as an eighth waste?
It's a good question. When I got my certification a long time ago, the person that asked this, maybe you've heard before of an acronym called downtime. Part of that was just like you said, looking at the skill set of the person, right? Making sure that when you're looking at waste, do you have people in there performing the process that have the right skill set? It kind of depends on how you look at this. I mean, there's been kind of a transition over the last few years of Six Sigma to kind of get away from that acronym or get away from downtime and look at Muda. So in case you're wondering what downtime is, if you give me just 1 second, I can pull it up on the screen right here so you guys can see it and what it means. They call it the 8 wastes of lean, and let's see if I can bring it up on the screen here. Here you go. Check this out. See it right? Oh, see it right there? Defects, overproduction, waiting, non-utilized talent was the one that I believe was being asked about. Transportation, motion, extra processing. This acronym is one that was around forever, and you could use downtime to remind you of what those are. Well, if you go outside of this and start looking at a lot more practitioners now, they're not necessarily using downtime anymore. They just use the 7 deadly Muda, and effectively it's downtime minus the N, the non-utilized talent. So I think that might be what the question was, right, Jesse?
Yes.
I don't know if that answers the question or not, but there was a shift in the thought process on how it was done. So it got turned from 8 wastes to 7. When I got certified back in April of 2013, downtime was the term that we used. But lately they've been calling it something different, just calling it the 7 Muda.
Yep, that answered Manali's question. A couple of comments. Thank you for your military service came in.
Technically on that, downtime in the back of your head would still work. It'd still be fine. Oh, whoever said thank you for the service, you're quite welcome.
Is Tim Woody not used anymore to explain the wastes? All caps.
I know what you're talking about. I have not seen it lately. I remember that, right, the acronym, the Tim Wood acronym, is that what you're referring to? Yes. T-I-M-W-O-O-D.
Tim Woods. Somebody's asking maybe Tim Woods.
Yeah, it would be Tim Wood, like the name, like Tim and then the last name Wood. I haven't seen it very often, right? But it does. I'm looking it up real quick because I remember Tim Woods and I can't remember what it was. S stands for skills, but yeah, the rest of it: transportation, inventory, motion, waiting, overproduction, overprocessing, and defects. You could use Tim Wood if you wanted to use that, just like the name T-I-M-W-O-O-D, and that would work. I just don't normally teach it in class, but technically Tim Wood would fit the 7 Muda.
One other question is, what category PDU does this apply to? I don't have an answer.
We're talking about professional development units.
Yes.
That I don't know the answer for the question, but what I can tell you is that if you go through and take our courses, right? If you go through and take the green belt, or if you go and take the black belt course, for example, you do get to have CEUs, right, continuing education units, and PDUs. And I want to say, I'm trying to remember how many this qualifies for, but it's something along the lines of, oh shoot, I don't remember the number. If you give me 1 second, I can look super fast and I can tell you. I believe the way it works is for PDUs, you get 85 for taking the green belt course, completing the course, and passing the exam. And then if you do the black belt course, the black belt course is 105. 100. So like what they're referring to is if you have somebody who is maybe a PMP, and they have to, they're doing as part of their PMP, they have to maintain professional development, and they have to do continuous education. The PDU is the professional development units. It's the number of units that you get credit for when you complete these different kinds of classes. So with us, you do get PDUs as well as continuing education units for taking the green belt and the black belt, completing it, and passing the exam. I don't know if that helps answer the question. And if you need something more specific, you can always email us directly there, and we can look into it and give you a direct answer as far as what you're looking for. But hopefully that answered the question.
Yes, says thank you. Delaney says thank you. One last one as we wrap up time here. Under lean, what does pull systems mean?
Oh, very good. So there's two different kinds of systems. There's push and there's pull. A push system is one where production is based on forecasted demand. So like, for example, I had the master black belts I learned under, her name is Tracy, and she used to work at a Jack in the Box in San Diego. And what they would do is they would plan out how much food they'd have to cook during the course of a day. So they would look like, let's say, at the lunch rush, and for them lunch was from 10 to 2, and they would look at previous sales to say, okay, in our restaurant from Monday through Friday from 10 to 2, we sell on average last month it was 100 jumbo jacks per that time period. So what they would start doing is they would start preparing ahead of time. So they're determining what they're going to produce based upon past performance and what they believe is going to happen in the future, right? And then, of course, if they decide to make 100 jumbo jacks and kind of pre-prepare them, of course, back in the day of the heat lamps, if they found that they didn't sell all of them, now they had waste because they had burgers that were cooked that they couldn't sell. So they had waste. A pull production system is a system where production does not happen unless demanded by the customer, when a customer uses a product. So if you go to the grocery store, if you ever go to a grocery store, and I myself used to work at Albertsons, if you ever go to a grocery store and you go to where the milk is or where the bread is, and you go there, a lot of those grocery stores utilize what's known as the FIFO method, the first in, first out, which is why if you ever go look at the bread or you look at the milk or something like that, you'll see that the things that are going to expire the soonest are in the front, and as you pull them out, the things in the back that are going to expire the latest are back there because everything's loaded from back to front. So a pull production system means this. If I've got 20 boxes of something on a shelf and no boxes are ever bought, there's no need to produce more because I won't need any more. But if 10 boxes are pulled off the shelf and I have 10 left and it's time for me to reorder, then I need to get 10 more boxes in order to replace what was used because the customer usage demanded that I produce or provide more. That's what a pull system is. Production, right? Customers pull it. In the restaurant business, I was talking about Jack in the Box, about the push system. Well, that turned into, we won't make it till you order it. When the customer placed the order, then kicked off the process of making the food. That was a true pull production system. No order, no production. I hope that answers the question.
Looks like it did. I think, yes, Carolyn says yes, thank you. So I think we can move on to the next slide, our final slide.
So as it says here, as you saw at the invitation for the webinar, you have an opportunity to go out and take a white belt certification test. It's a real quick twist to take. I know that's written right there, but I believe that Jesse is providing for you in the chat box.
That's correct.
The link itself that will allow you to click on that, and then you can go out and take the exam. And if you don't have that link, as he said earlier, if you go out later on, you're going to get this PowerPoint. It's actually a PDF of this PowerPoint presentation. You can then go in here and click on this link or copy it and paste it, or if you want to, you can always email info, as you see here, at nhlearninggroup.com, and they can reply back and attach the link. I would think that'd be all right to do, Jesse. Just you'd reply back, attach the link, the person clicks on it, they can take the test.
That's correct. So I have the link in the chat box, and then I just replied to Brenda looking for the link, so you can find that answer to her question. So 2 places to find the link there, as well as on Gabe's screen. You could type in that URL.
Oh, I do see a question here. Oh, never mind. I saw you answered the question about 7 days. Okay. Are there any other, is there anything else? Any other questions that are in that you want me to answer, or are we pretty much calling it a day?
I think that's about it. Thank you all.
Okay, I will leave the address up here on the screen like this so that you know where to go. And guys, thank you very much for attending. I hope you enjoyed the session, and hopefully I'll get an opportunity to see you in a class down the road. If so, just let me know. Hey, I took the white belt webinar and here I am. So anyway, thank you guys for your time. I hope everything worked out really well and you got a good overview of Six Sigma. Again, thanks for the time. Have a great day.